get ready for a deep dive. And I have to say, this one really grabbed my attention when you sent over that podcast episode
Oh, yeah.
about Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
Okay.
Just something about the mix of psychology and philosophy and some like really straight to the point life advice. It's not your typical self-help book, is it?
No, not at all. And I think that's what's kind of made it so interesting for a lot of people. It's really sparked a lot of conversation.
It really has. So today what we're going to do is pull out the most interesting parts, the thought-provoking points from that podcast without, overwhelming everyone with all the details.
Yeah.
Get right to the heart of it.
That's good.
Now, the podcast described the book as an antidote to chaos. And I have to admit, that really piqued my curiosity.
Yeah.
What does Peterson even mean by chaos?
Well, Peterson's kind of starting point is that life just is chaotic. Suffering and uncertainty are just unavoidable parts of the human experience. We're constantly dealing with challenges, things that are happening in our own heads and things that are happening outside of ourselves. But instead of pretending those things aren't there, he really emphasizes the need to create some kind of order within ourselves in order to face all of that.
So it's not like we're supposed to achieve this perfect state of happiness.
No, not at all. He actually kind of pushes back against this idea that, happiness is the be-all and end-all. He thinks that meaning and purpose are what really help us get through tough times.
Okay, meaning and purpose. That's interesting.
Yeah, and he argues that we have to take responsibility for our own lives, our choices, even the things that we're suffering through, to really thrive.
That's pretty intense. But honestly, I think there's something to be said for his honesty, right? Like, life is hard. Maybe pretending it's not makes things even tougher in the long run. So how do these 12 rules actually fit into all of this? Like, are they some sort of step-by-step guide to creating that sense of order?
Think of them more as like building blocks. Each rule tackles a different part of life. Some are about how we see ourselves, some are about how we interact with other people. But one thing that Peterson's very clear about is that this process, creating this order, it takes effort, it takes discipline, and it takes being willing to face some hard truths about yourself.
And it's not just like any old self-help book either, is it? I mean, the podcast mentioned how it brings in stuff from psychology, philosophy, even the Bible.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's got insights in there from Jung, Nietzsche, biblical stories, all kinds of things. And I think using all of those different perspectives, that's what makes it more stimulating, more intellectually engaging than a typical self-improvement book.
Definitely. It's not offering easy answers. It's making people really think critically about life. So let's get into some of these rules. Rule number 1, and this one really got me, it's stand up straight with your shoulders back. I mean, at first glance, it sounds like your mom telling you to have good posture, but there's got to be more to it.
Yeah, Peterson actually uses posture as a metaphor for something a lot deeper. What he's saying is that our body language, how we carry ourselves, it's directly connected to how we feel mentally.
So it's not just about looking confident. It's about actually feeling confident on the inside.
Exactly. He argues that there's a really strong link between our minds and our bodies. When we slump over, don't make eye contact, just kind of make ourselves small, we're sending signals that we're insecure, maybe even submissive. And those signals, they go out to other people, sure, but they also go to ourselves.
Interesting. So, our body language can actually reinforce those feelings of insecurity. So if we force ourselves to stand up straighter, does that actually trick our brains into feeling more confident?
It can. He actually talks about research that shows how adopting that kind of upright, open posture can change things in your body.
Right.
Literally increase testosterone and lower cortisol.
Whoa, for real?
Yeah. And those are hormones that are directly related to confidence and stress.
So even if we don't feel confident, consciously changing our posture can actually start to shift our internal state.
Like sending a message to your brain that says, hey, we can handle this. And if you keep sending that message, it can really change how confident you feel and how you deal with the world.
Now, this is where the lobsters come in, right? The podcast mentioned something about Peterson using lobsters to make a point.
He does. He loves using these kind of unusual comparisons to get his point across. So he talks about how lobsters, like a lot of animals, have these dominance hierarchies. And the way they position their bodies is a big clue to where they stand in that hierarchy. The more dominant a lobster is, the more upright and open its posture.
So even in the lobster world, posture matters. But how does that relate to us humans with all our, complex thoughts and emotions and social stuff?
What he's getting at is that despite all the evolution we've gone through, with our big brains and all our complicated social structures, We still share a lot of those basic biological mechanisms with creatures like lobsters. Our bodies are always sending and receiving signals, even if we're not aware of it. And those signals affect how we see ourselves and how other people see us.
So even if we don't realize it, our posture is speaking volumes about our confidence and self-worth.
Absolutely. And that means that by choosing to adopt a more confident posture, we're not only affecting how others see us, we're also sending a really powerful message to our own brains and bodies.
Okay, I'm starting to see the practical side of all of this. It's not just about vanity, it's about actually taking control of our mental state. So if you're feeling intimidated or stressed, making an effort to stand up straight, shoulders back, could actually help you feel more capable of dealing with the situation.
Exactly. That's the essence of Rule 1. It's a reminder to be aware of how we're holding ourselves and use that to build our inner strength and resilience.
All right, that was just the first rule. And the podcasts you sent, they really emphasized rule number 2. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Now even just hearing that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Do I actually treat myself with that much care? I don't know.
That's exactly the question Peterson wants us to ask.
Yeah.
He's noticed that we're often way kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. We're quick to criticize ourselves, we set these crazy expectations, and we tend to dwell on our flaws rather than our strengths.
It's like we all have this inner critic that just won't shut up. Like, it's so much easier to give encouragement to a friend who's struggling than to give that same compassion to ourselves.
Yeah, it's a common human tendency, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And often we're just repeating negative things we've heard from our past, from society.
Yeah.
And those messages become this inner critic tearing us down and holding us back.
So how do we break free from all of that? How do we escape that cycle of self-criticism and actually start treating ourselves with the respect we deserve?
Peterson suggests we try to look at it differently. He says, imagine that you're responsible for someone you really care about. A child, a best friend, even a pet.
Okay.
How would you treat them if they were having a hard time? Would you yell at them for their mistakes or be super judgmental?
Of course not. I mean, you try to lift them up, Give them support, unconditional love, help them see their good qualities and make positive changes.
Exactly. And that's the same type of care that we need to give to ourselves. It's about building a relationship with yourself based on respect, understanding, and knowing that you're worthy, just as you are.
Yeah, it's not about being perfect or pretending our flaws don't exist.
Right.
It's about, giving ourselves the same kindness and patience that we'd give to someone we love.
Exactly. It's a big shift in perspective, and I think it's a tough one for a lot of people.
I can see that.
We've kind of been taught that being self-critical is how we grow, and that being kind to ourselves is like being selfish or weak.
That's so true. We're always told to push harder and never give up. You don't hear a lot about self-compassion.
Yeah, and that's what makes this rule so important. Peterson's reminding us that you can't give to others if you're running on empty.
Yeah.
We have to take care of ourselves, our minds, and our bodies if we want to be there for others and achieve our goals.
This is already making me think about how I talk to myself. It's like we need to become our own best friend, our own cheerleader.
I like that.
All right, this deep dive is already more insightful than I expected. Now, the podcast you sent over, it mentioned a rule that they said was a little controversial. Rule number 6, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And honestly, that does sound a little harsh at first.
You can sound that way, yeah. But let's unpack what he's actually trying to say here.
Okay, please.
He's really stressing that you have to take responsibility for yourself before you can effectively go out and try to change the world.
So less about having a spotless home and more about having your own life together before you try to fix everyone else's problems.
Exactly. The clean your room metaphor that gets attached to this rule, it's not really about being tidy. It's about honestly looking at your own life, figuring out what you need to work on, and taking ownership of your actions before you go pointing fingers or trying to solve global issues.
Yeah, I can see how that could be misunderstood as saying just focus on yourself and ignore what's wrong with the world. But it sounds like what Peterson's really getting at is that you need to have a solid foundation before you can actually make a meaningful impact.
Right. It's a more grounded approach to change.
It's like that saying, be the change you wish to see in the world. So if you want to make a positive impact, you got to start by getting your own house in order.
And that's where the personal responsibility piece comes in. Peterson's challenging us to lead by example, to actually live out the values we want to see in society.
So instead of just complaining about things, we need to actually put in the work to improve our own lives. Be the change we want to see.
Right. He argues that by focusing on what we can control, our own thoughts, our own actions, That's how we build a strong foundation
Mm-hmm.
to deal with all the complexity out there in the world.
Okay, this rule is definitely making me think. So it's about self-reflection, being more responsible for yourself, and, having that solid base to actually go out and make a difference. All right, this deep dive is getting pretty deep. But, the podcast also brought up one rule that I have to admit made me chuckle a bit. It's Rule 12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Seriously.
Yeah, it seems like a weird one, right? Especially next to all this talk about order and responsibility and all these big ideas.
Exactly. So explain this one to me. What's the deal with the cats?
Well, I think Peterson recognizes that life can be really tough, and
Yeah.
we need to find ways to, lighten up and connect with something positive to help us get through.
So it's like a reminder to not take ourselves too seriously, appreciate the simple things.
That's part of it, but it goes a bit deeper, I think.
Yeah.
Petting a cat, doing something that makes you feel good and connected, even for a short time, can actually have a big effect on how you feel overall.
Like a reset button for your brain.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even when things are tough, there's still beauty in the world. There's still good to be found.
And sometimes all it takes is a furry friend to remind us of that.
Exactly. And these small acts of kindness, even something as simple as petting a cat, they can actually spread outwards. It's a reminder that even when we're struggling, we can still create those little moments of positivity.
I love that.
And, life isn't all about achieving and striving. It's also about appreciating what we have, finding the good in the everyday, and, just being grateful for those small things that make us happy.
Well, this deep dive is definitely full of surprises. I'm starting to understand why this book, 12 Rules for Life, has resonated with so many people. It's got this mix of serious advice, philosophical stuff, and then those little down-to-earth things like petting cats. It's really compelling.
Yeah, it's a unique combination that has really sparked a lot of conversation, even debate. And Peterson, he's really good at making us question our assumptions and think critically about the world.
Well, we've only scratched the surface of 12 Rules for Life, but I'm already feeling inspired to learn more.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more to unpack here. Maybe we should take a little break and come back to this.
Sounds good. Let's pick this up again soon. And to everyone listening, stay tuned.
We'll be back. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into 12 Rules for Life. We've already uncovered some pretty fascinating stuff, but now I'm really curious to explore why this book has become such a phenomenon.
I am too. I mean, the podcast mentioned it's been translated into like a zillion languages, sold
Yeah.
millions of copies worldwide. It's clearly hit a nerve with people. What do you think is driving all of that?
I think it's a few things, but one big factor is how Peterson connects these philosophical ideas with practical advice. He's not afraid to tackle those huge questions about the meaning of life, suffering, all that heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But then he also gives you real strategies for dealing with those things in your everyday life.
So it's not just abstract thinking, it's about applying those big ideas to the real world.
Exactly. He wants people to engage with their lives on a deeper level, to be in the driver's seat rather than just letting life happen to them. And I think that message of taking control, that's really powerful, especially when the world feels so out of control sometimes.
And the podcast also pointed out how Peterson is like brutally honest about how hard life can be. It's not your typical self-help, think positive and everything will be great kind of thing.
Right. He totally flips that script. He starts by saying suffering is just part of the human experience.
Yeah.
And he suggests that real strength comes from learning to deal with those difficult parts of life.
So it's more like, hey, life is hard. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means you're human.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people find comfort in that, knowing they're not alone in their struggles. He's not trying to sugarcoat things. He's validating their experience.
Okay, so regardless of whether people agree with everything he says, it sounds like this book is starting some important conversations. What are some of the things people are talking about?
Oh, it's become this cultural touchstone for all sorts of topics. Personal responsibility, finding meaning in life, the role of tradition, all that. Peterson's not afraid to talk about controversial things, and that's definitely led to some really heated debates.
So it's more than just a self-help book. It's making people think about these bigger questions about how we live and what's important.
Yeah. And it shows how skilled he is at talking about complex stuff in a way that's thought-provoking and still easy to understand. Whether you agree with him or not, he makes you think.
And that's a sign of a good book, right? It's not about giving you all the answers. It's about making you ask the right questions.
I totally agree. Even if you don't agree with his conclusions, just the process of thinking about these ideas can be really valuable.
Now, speaking of challenging assumptions, remember that cat petting rule. Rule number 12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. I still can't get over that one.
I know, right? It seems so out of place.
Yeah.
But I think it tells us something important about how Peterson views human nature. He's all about discipline and facing hard truths, but he also knows that we need balance. We need those lighter moments.
So it's like a reminder to not always be so serious, to enjoy the simple things in life.
Yeah, and those moments, even if they seem small, they can really make a difference. There's actually research that shows interacting with animals can lower stress, boost your mood, even make you feel more connected to other people.
So petting a cat isn't just about being nice to the cat, it's actually good for you.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder to build those little acts of kindness and joy into our lives. It's not about giving up on your goals. It's about finding a balance between pushing yourself and taking time to appreciate what you have.
It's about recognizing that a good life is about more than just achievements and accomplishments. It's also about those little moments of connection and happiness.
Exactly. Now, the podcast you sent over, it mentioned that Peterson draws a lot from Carl Jung, the psychologist.
Oh yeah, that was definitely intriguing. I'm familiar with some of Jung's ideas, but I'd love to hear your take on how Peterson uses those in 12 Rules for Life.
It's a big influence, especially when it comes to things like archetypes, the shadow self, and the process of individuation. But to really get Peterson's take, it helps to understand a little bit about Jung himself.
Okay, mini deep dive within a deep dive.
Exactly. So Carl Jung was around the same time as Sigmund Freud. They were both pioneers in psychoanalysis.
Right.
But Jung eventually went his own way, developed his own ideas about how the mind works.
What were some of the key differences between them?
One big one was their view of the unconscious mind. Freud focused mainly on what he called the personal unconscious, basically repressed memories and experiences that are unique to each person.
Okay.
Jung, on the other hand, he proposed this idea of a collective unconscious.
Collective unconscious. That sounds pretty intense.
It is. Imagine this vast universal well of human experience, instincts, archetypes, things that we all inherit, no matter what culture we're from or how we were raised.
So it's like this shared pool of human experience that we all tap into.
Exactly. And Jung thought this collective unconscious is where we find these things called archetypes, universal symbols and figures that represent different aspects of human experience.
Okay, like the hero, the villain, the wise old man, those show up in stories all over the world.
Yeah, and Jung's theory is that these archetypes aren't just literary devices. They actually reflect something deep within our collective psyche.
So how does all of this connect to Peterson and 12 Rules? I can see how archetypes are relevant to human behavior, but how does that translate into advice on how to live your life?
Peterson sees these archetypes as powerful forces that are shaping our lives, whether we realize it or not.
Okay.
He uses them to explain why we see the same patterns repeating in history, why we're drawn to certain stories, why we struggle with the same internal conflict.
So like those archetypes are playing out in our own personal lives.
Right. For example, that hero archetype, it could show up in your desire to overcome challenges and make a difference in the world. The shadow archetype that represents our darker side, the things we try to hide, that could show up in negative thoughts, bad habits, you know.
So would Peterson say we need to confront those darker parts of ourselves instead of just trying to ignore them?
That's where individuation comes in.
Yeah.
Jung believed that to become a whole integrated person, you have to face those shadow aspects of yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we're always denying or trying to bury those parts, they're just going to cause problems in other ways.
Exactly. Peterson argues that acknowledging and integrating those parts of ourselves is how we become more psychologically whole, more authentic.
Wow, we went from petting cats to the collective unconscious in like 5 minutes. This deep dive is really living up to its name.
It is. Maybe we should take a quick pause here. When we come back, I'd love to explore some of the bigger implications of Peterson's work and what it all might mean for our listeners.
That sounds great. Everyone listening, stay with us. We'll be right back.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We've explored those core ideas, those Jungian influences, and now I'm really thinking about that lasting impact. What do you think people take away from this book, even if they don't, agree with everything Peterson says?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that focus on personal responsibility. Regardless of whether you agree with all of his specific points, Peterson really pushes people to take charge of their own lives. to own their choices, their actions, their well-being.
That's a pretty powerful message, especially in a culture where we're often encouraged to blame outside forces for our problems. Instead of focusing on what's wrong with the world, he's saying, hey, look inward first. What can you do to improve your life?
Yeah.
How can you be a more responsible person, a better member of society?
Exactly. It's not about saying individuals are to blame for every problem, but it's about empowering people to make choices that lead to a more fulfilling life, a life with meaning. It's like recognizing that we actually have agency, that we're not just passengers on this crazy ride called life. We can steer the ship, even if we can't control the waves.
I love that analogy. And that sense of agency, that belief that you can actually create positive change, that's powerful stuff. It can help us move from feeling helpless to feeling empowered, like we can actually shape our own destinies.
We've talked a lot about the serious stuff, but I keep thinking about those lighter aspects of the book, like that cat petting rule. Do you think it means more than just enjoying those little moments of joy?
I think it points to how important balance is in life. Peterson's all about discipline and responsibility and facing those tough truths. But he also knows we need connection, we need beauty, we need moments of peace in the middle of all the chaos.
It's like a reminder that even when we're striving for meaning and order, we need to make room for those things that bring us joy, that feed our souls. Those times when we can just be playful, connect with nature, just be present and appreciate the beauty around us. Those things aren't frivolous, they're important for our well-being.
Right. And I think that message is especially important now when everything feels so rushed and focused on achievement. It's a reminder to slow down, appreciate the simple things, nurture those connections that make us feel like we belong and that we're okay.
It's not about giving up on our goals or anything. It's about having a broader view of what a meaningful life really is. It's realizing that fulfillment comes from balancing our striding with a little bit of savoring, facing those challenges, but also embracing joy.
And remembering that sometimes those big insights come from the most unexpected places, like, petting a random cat on the street.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've covered a lot, from lobster hierarchies and the shadow self to the importance of standing up straight and, of course, petting those cats. As we wrap up, what's the one key insight, the thing you really hope our listener will take away from this exploration of 12 rules for life?
If I had to pick one thing, it's this. You have the power to create meaning in your own life. It won't be easy. It's going to take effort and a willingness to look inward, to confront those inner challenges and the ones out in the world. But it's in that struggle, in that process of facing and overcoming those things, that you find the potential for real growth and a life that has purpose.
I love that. So if our listener wants to learn more, to really dig into Peterson's work, what would you suggest as a next step?
I'd say go straight to the source, read the book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. It's a dense book. It can be tough at times, but it's worth it. And remember, you don't have to agree with everything he says to find value in it. Just approach it with an open mind, a critical eye, and be ready to think about those big questions he raises.
Great advice. And for anyone who's really fascinated by the psychology we talked about, I'd also recommend checking out the works of Carl Jung. His ideas about archetypes, the collective unconscious, individuation, all of that, it offers a really interesting perspective on Peterson's work and even on our own lives.
Exploring Jung's work, that's a whole other deep dive right there.
That's for sure. But for now, we've reached the end of our exploration of 12 Rules for Life. We hope you found this deep dive thought-provoking and maybe even a little inspiring to learn more.
And we always encourage you to keep digging into the things that resonate with you. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep looking for those bits of wisdom that help you create a life that's meaningful and fulfilling.
Until next time, happy reading, happy reflecting, and happy cat petting.